Carlos Castaneda wrote more books about shamanism than most people have ever come across in my life. I read every single one. His teacher was called Don Juan Matos, and his teacher, Don Juan Matos, the shaman, made it very clear that in his opinion there's only one thing that books were useful for, and that was to go and wipe your bum with when you'd gone and had a crap. That was his attitude towards books and shamanism. And it was funny that here was this guy who was his apprentice, who was writing all these books, getting them all published, and they became worldwide bestsellers. And somehow I feel that that little hint that Don Juan Matos threw out actually was quite a valid point. And here's the thing that puzzles me about these Castaneda books. At no point in any of the books does he ever mention what I consider to be the most important point of shamanism. Nowhere, not in any of his books ever did he mention it. He didn't even allude to it. I'll do more than that now, because on the beginning of my shamanic practitioner's course, the very first thing I learned to do was what we call shamanic journeying. Ah, right, light bulb lights up. So that's what it's all about. And it's funny that no matter all these books I've read, not a single word about it. So I don't recommend any books. All I recommend is training. These days you are sport for choice. Go on the internet, put the word shamanism in. You'll find lots of websites coming up, lots of different people and organisations offering training in shamanic practice. That's the way to do it. There's some things you can get from books, and there are some things you need to obtain through experience, and shamanism, that's one of those things. It's an experiential job. That's my view. I wouldn't recommend any books. Guides are the second cornerstone of shamanism. The first is definitely the shamanic journey, and the second is the guides. Now, my very first guide did not come through my shamanic practice at all. My guide comes from a completely different source. One that very much surprised me. The woman I married, her name's Cinda, she introduced me to the Spiritualist Church, and I attended a few of their services. After a while I decided to join their development circle. Now, in a Spiritualist Church development circle, one of the first things you get to learn to do is to go on what they call guided meditations. A guided meditation is another name for a shamanic journey, and on this guided meditation the person guiding you is talking you through the experience, and they take you through their conversation to a place where you are invited to meet a guide. I did that. I met a guide. I walked along this country road. There was a hedge the other side of... I walked along this country road, and there was a hedge both sides of the road. On the other side of the hedge there were fields. I saw a gate. I opened the gate in my guided meditation, my journey, my active imagination, and I went into the field, and it was a beautiful English field with oak trees in it, what people call parkland, so just the occasional oak tree in the field. And as I walked deeper into the field I saw somebody approaching. He wore a brown habit. He was dressed like a medieval monk with a hood and a brown habit, and when I walked up to him I could see he had a brown beard, and he had very kind smiling eyes, and he told me his name. His name, he said, was Jonathan, and he was my very first guide. And Jonathan was with me for more than 25 years, and in that 25-year period I mostly took no notice of Jonathan whatsoever. I lived in ignorance of his existence. I took virtually no advantage of his presence, and it wasn't until I began my shamanic practitioner's course that I finally woke up and realised, hey, that guy that I was introduced to all that time ago, he's a shamanic guide. So that was my first guide. My second guide I got to meet on the very first day of my very first weekend of the practitioner's course. We were explained what a shamanic journey was. We were told that it was about the following thing. First of all, you get into what is called a light trance state, and that can be invoked in different ways. One way you can do this, very, very easy, is to do some breathing exercise. And the breathing exercise you would do is this. You'd breathe out, and you breathe in fully and deeply. You'd hold for as long as you can. You'd then breathe out again and hold for as long as you can, and that's one cycle. So breathe in fully and deeply, hold for as long as you can, breathe out fully, hold for as long as you can. So you do that 7 times. In, hold, out, hold. If you do that, you'll be in the light trance state, just like that, completely unavoidable. In that light trance state, you can then do shamanic journeying. That's not the way I was taught. The way I was taught was rather different. Our practitioner, teacher, used a drum, and use the rhythm of the drum beat to guide us into a trance state. Very easy, takes even less time, very effective. Something else you can do, if you don't want to do the breathing exercise and you haven't got a drum, you can tap, literally. If I was to do this, that would send me into a light trance state. What I'd be doing is I'd be tapping between about 6 and 8 cycles per second if I was doing that, and that would give me what's called a light trance state, the theta brain rhythm, and that would put me in a perfect condition to do my shamanic journeying. So you can see there's no shortage of different ways you can get into this condition. Now, the light trance state, what you've done is you've changed your normal brain rhythms from beta, which is the state we're mostly in. You go into a slower rhythm which is called alpha, and you drop into an even slower one called theta. When you're in that theta brain rhythm, that's when shamanic journeying becomes really easy. And we were given the advice, what I want you to do is I want you to find a way to travel downwards into the earth, and when you travel downwards into the earth, I want you to have a very clear intention about what you're doing. So we did, and we said, each one of us to ourselves, I intend to travel to meet my guide. I intend to travel to meet my guide. I intend to travel to meet my guide. That's it. It was sealed. The light trance state is there. The ability to travel into the earth is there, and my intent to meet my guide is there. If all those things are in place, the inevitable result will take place. I'll meet my guide, and so I did. And at the end of the experience, the drum beat changed. We were brought back the same way we travelled in our active imaginations, and people began to share about what their guide was like. And I remember people sharing about they met a lion, they met a wolf, they met an eagle, they met a puma, they met a warrior. Really interesting stuff. And I sat there waiting for my turn, and when it was my turn I said, yes, I met my guide, I met a worm. Oh, yes, a worm. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it? Well, I was a bit surprised when I heard all these exotic animals these other people had journeys for, but I was actually sitting there feeling very quietly happy with myself, because although my guide might seem very unglamorous, a worm, I learnt when I asked my worm a few simple questions just what my worm would help me to do, and my worm explained he would help me do healing work. And he also explained that when worms turn, universes rearrange themselves, and that's a way to explain that sometimes the smallest of the creatures in this beautiful world of ours can have the most powerful results. And we all know if it was not for certain bacteria, we would not even have decomposition and composting, and if that didn't happen, then all our waste would just lie and not get consumed, and we'd all die in our own filth. So yes, sometimes the smallest creatures have got the greatest powers. And in the time since I encountered my worm in 2005, through the following 5 years to 2010, my goodness me, the things my worm can do, absolutely amazing. I'll give you an example. I did some shamanic work very recently for someone. It was a follow-up piece of work. When I've done my main universal soul retrieval work, 21 days later I will do a follow-up piece of work, and I invited the person's energy body to come into the healing space, and my worm entered the person's body and duplicated itself into hundreds of millions of nanoworms, worms which are so small you would not even be able to see them in the most powerful microscopes. And what these worms do, hundreds of millions of them, they all went into each of the nuclei of the cells of that person's body, and they examined the condition of the person's DNA, and where there was any need to rectify any damaged DNA, they set to work to rectify it, and the result is it's possible to heal the person on a really deep cellular level. That's the kind of work my guide the worm can do. So every day I do shamanic work, I give thanks to my worm, for he's one of my great guides.